Ich begrüße ganz herzlich nochmal Elizabeth und Ray. Und gebe jetzt das Wort an Ray.
Vielen Dank, Peter. Can I be heard? I can, good. Elizabeth und ich waren vor 10 Jahren auch in Deutschland. Wir machten eine Rundreise. We stopped in about 7 German cities to make presentations like this, some in very large churches that welcomed us. I don't know if they still would welcome us, but we're going to try. The reason I wanted to start here is because something wonderful happened while we were traveling from, where was it, Hamburg to Berlin on a train. And Elizabeth knows German from her childhood, and she was teaching me a new song for me, which I never learned in the CIA. It was Die Gedanken sind frei. And it was a wonderful song, but I didn't know it, so she was teaching me it. And all of a sudden, these women across the aisle who were of a certain age, even older than I at the time, were singing. And so I went over to them and I said, could you tell me how you know that song? And they said, oh, they said, well, of course we know it. So I said, did you sing it during das Dritten Reich? And they looked at me like I was from somewhere out of space, and they said, doch, of course we sang it during das Dritten Reich, okay? Now, that was such an Ermutigung for me. I mean, wow. They sang it during Hitler's time, and now I think, without drawing any invidious comparisons, we need to sing it now. Now, many of you of a certain age know it. Maybe even some of you people that are younger than I, which I think it counts to for everyone here, will know it. So if we could start, we three as a trio are going to start it out for you. We're only going to sing the first verse. So if you know it, please don't be bashful. This needs to ring clear and klar. Die Gedanken sind frei, wer soll sie erraten? Sie fliegen vorbei, wie nächtlichen Schatten. Kein Mensch wird sie wissen, kein Jäger erschießen mit Pulver und Blei. Die Gedanken sind frei.
Können Sie mich hören? Okay, gut. Also, ich möchte mich zuerst vorstellen. Ich heiße Elizabeth Murray. Ich weiß nicht, ob mein Deutsch, also ich habe kein Deutsch für 10 Jahre gesprochen, aber zuerst möchte ich bedanken Nachdenkseiten für diese schöne Einladung. Ich habe ein bisschen mit Peter gesprochen über die Diskussionsgruppen, das ihr hier macht, und ich bin das imponiert mir sehr viel. Ich glaube, dass diese Diskussionen über alles, über politische Sachen und so weiter sind wirklich sehr wichtig in diese Zeiten, besonders in diese Zeiten. Und ich hätte gerne, wenn wir das auch in USA machen, und ich glaube, ich werde jetzt versuchen, etwas dort zu beginnen. Denn dieses wirklich, wenn die Leute miteinander Diskussionen haben. Ich werde euch ein bisschen von meinem Hintergrund geben, aber zuerst möchte ich sagen, dass ich kenne dieses Gegend ein bisschen. In 1973 habe ich in der Nähe von Worms gelebt für ein Jahr, in Ebersheim. Mein Vater war also nicht militärisch, aber er hat für den amerikanischen Armee gearbeitet und also wohnten wir in das schöne Dorf Ebersheim und dann sind wir nach Nürnberg gezogen, das zweite Jahr und endlich in Zweibrücken. So 3 Jahre in Deutschland zwischen 1973, ich glaube Helmut Schmidt war noch da und bis 1976. Also dies bringt so sehr schöne Erinnerungen, wieder hier zu sein. Also ich war ein politischer Analyst in die also CIA für 27 Jahre, aber ich sollte sagen, dass ich für die ersten 20 Jahre nur auf so Medien gearbeitet habe. Ich war also keine Spioniste, aber oh, bin ich so zu laut oder? Okay. Ich war so genannten Media-Analysten und ich habe an der Nahe Osten spezialisiert und die haben mich nach, die haben mir oder die haben mich? Danke. Ja, die haben mich nach Jordanien geschickt und auch nach England für 2 Jahre und wir haben in diesen Orten so Übersetzungen gemacht über von den Nachrichten von Arabisch und auch von also viele verschiedene Sprachen für die Regierung, damit sie wussten, was sagten der Präsident zum Beispiel von Jordanien oder die Palästinenser oder die Leute in Syrien und so. So das halte ich für wichtige Arbeit, damit unsere Regierung bessere Verständnis hätte über die Sachen in diese Länder. Was noch? Ich habe sehr viel erlebt, besonders in Jordanien. Soll ich auf Englisch sprechen oder geht es?
Entweder oder.
Okay. Zum Beispiel, also ich hatte keinen Hintergrund in Studierung von Nahe Osten, aber ich war dort und ich lernte Arabisch also mit den Leuten, denn ich habe die Regierung gefragt, bitte schicken Sie mir zu einer Schule, damit ich Arabisch lerne. Und die haben gesagt, nee, das ist nicht wichtig, denn Sie werden bei der amerikanischen Botschaft arbeiten und Sie brauchen überhaupt nicht Arabisch zu lernen, weil die Leute durch alle Englisch sprechen werden. Und das war so die Attitude, das war die
Einstellung, die Haltung.
Ja, und das fand ich sehr schlecht, denn also zum Beispiel, als ich in Deutschland als junges Mädchen gelebt habe, war es also selbstverständlich, dass ich Deutsch lernen sollte. Aber dasselbe ist mir passiert. Ich war so in 8th Grade und ich wollte Deutsch lernen und die haben gesagt, nee, das beginnt nicht, bis du in das nächste Jahr. Und was mache ich für 1 Jahr in Deutschland ohne Deutsch? Also habe ich selbst studiert. Und das fand ich sehr wichtig. Wenn man ein Gast in ein fremdes Land ist, das ist meine Pflicht, so die Fremdsprache zu lernen. Danke, aber wie gesagt, das sollte selbstverständlich sein. Aber ich fand so, als ich in Deutschland war, ich fühlte so einsam, denn viele Amerikaner bei uns in der Schule und so, oh no, I don't need to learn German, they can just bring me the beer, you know. Aber das ist eine schreckliche Beleidigung und ich fühle, dass ich mich entschuldigen muss. Es tut mir leid, was in Deutschland passiert mit so vielen Amerikanern hier, die keinen Respekt für ihre Kultur haben. Und das soll nicht sein. Das ist ihr Land, ihre Kultur und es ist eigenartig und sie müssen das, you have to hold on to it. So, but I am digressing. I want to speak in English now because I'm going to get into some political details and mein Wortschatz in Deutschland nicht hält, doesn't hold out. While I was in Washington, I was invited in maybe 2010 to attend a very important meeting at a think tank. Weißt ihr, was ein think tank ist? Wie sagt man das auf Deutsch? Okay. Think tank. Oh. Okay, so die haben dort, I'm going to go in English and German, but they were discussing, die haben diskutiert über was in Gaza passiert ist in 2008 to 2009. The Israelis attacked Gaza. They called it Operation Cast Lead, and about 1,400 people were murdered in Gaza during this operation. I think it was from December 2008 to January 2009. I was in the audience, and one of the panelists who was speaking, he kind of smiled when he heard this number of 1,400 people killed. And he said, well, it's unfortunate, but every once in a while you have to mow the lawn. Man muss den Rasen mähen. Ab und zu. And, you know, right now I hear your reaction, and it's very sobering. But that evening, when I was in the audience, people laughed. They laughed and they smiled, and they thought it was very funny. And nobody stood up and said, you know, this is wrong. You should not be speaking this way. And I say this because I was sitting in the audience, and I was really, frankly, shocked that these Middle East experts, these were highly paid people in Washington who are supposed to be at the highest level of the U.S. government, that they could joke and laugh about Israel killing civilians in Gaza. And so this kind of, I was, you know, so impressed that I thought to myself, when I leave the government, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to tell people this, because there's a certain arrogance among elites in our government that puts very little value on the life of people, especially people of a certain color, of a certain culture. And unfortunately, this is very common. So this is something I shared, not with happiness at all, but just to let you know what I experienced. And I'll tell you another story. Back in November of 2002, a few months before our country attacked Iraq in March of 2003, I was invited to the U.S. Army War College, which is located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And the purpose for me being invited there was I was to join a large group of people from the intelligence community, and we were supposed to play out what would it be like if the United States were to go to war against Iraq. What would the political situation look like in the country? And we played certain roles. And the U.S. Military usually plays these war games ahead of any kind of military action. I guess it helps their military analysts. So this went on for 3 days, this role playing with different scenarios. And on the last day, I was sitting in a big room with a big gentleman sitting next to me. He was Iraqi, but he was married to an American professor. So he had been living in America for a long time. And during the discussions, I could see something was wrong with him. He was wearing dark glasses, and I could see tears coming down from each side of his glasses. And he wasn't saying anything, but I turned to him and I said, "Excuse me, sir, can I help you? What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" And he turned to me in a very soft voice and he said, "Everybody here is talking about military issues, political issues, strategic issues, and no one is talking about the thousands of people in my homeland, Iraq, that are going to die in your war." And at that moment, I just felt so terrible. I froze and I thought to myself, what am I doing here? This is wrong and he's right. This is tragic. There was no mention at all of the humanitarian situation or what was going to happen to all those civilians in Iraq. And he clearly knew that this was not just a game, that this was a plan that the U.S. government had. So I have to say that it was in this moment, just like in other moments in my career, when I stopped and thought to myself, what am I doing here? Why am I working here? This is wrong. This is really wrong. So in a sense, working there was an education, having these experiences. And when I was sent to the Middle East, I also had to go to Jerusalem on several occasions to pick up newspapers from the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem to be translated into English. And I was there in Jordan, I got there in 1989, and that was during the first Intifada. So I would often be caught in the evenings walking along the streets of old Jerusalem, and suddenly I would see Israeli soldiers throwing tear gas at little Palestinian kids. And I had to walk through some of that and see their guns and see the way they treated the people of Palestine who were just trying to live and go about their business. And I saw some very ugly things. I saw men riding big horses and beating people. And this was very different from what I was reading in American newspapers and seeing on American television. This is the kind of thing that they did not tell Americans about. So again, I mean, it's ironic, but if I had not worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, I would not have had the opportunity to travel and to see with my own eyes what the truth was. So, you know, nothing is simple, and there's two sides to every coin. But I am grateful for what I learned, because it transformed me, and it made me very determined to do something when I left and when I retired. And I have to tell you that I wanted to leave like right away. And I asked people, what should I do? Should I stay or should I leave? And I was often given the advice, Elizabeth, stay. We need people like you on the inside. You can tell your story when you get out. And that's what happened. I thought I was only going to stay for 3 or 4 years because I had studied journalism, and my first job out of university was as a reporter. And this was just going to be an experiment, but 3 years turned into 27 years, and I learned so much. And I feel very privileged to be able to share some of it with you. And I also want to say that as soon as I left the CIA, I immediately went into the peace movement. I had seen too much, I had experienced too much, and I knew that this is at least what I had to pay back for all the time that I was in the government. You know, so many of my colleagues went to work for Raytheon or Lockheed Martin and made a lot of money from their top secret security clearances. But to me, I mean, I couldn't do that. And I don't want to take up too much time because Rey ist an der Reihe. But I do want to say that I have, in a few months, I have to go to court on September the 2nd to answer for my actions. Another colleague and I got involved on, I think it was Ash Wednesday. We went to Raytheon headquarters in Tucson, Arizona, and we had some support from our peace group, but John and I walked into Raytheon headquarters, and when we were told to stop, we didn't. And we had a sign with us that said, Raytheon will turn all of us into ashes, because, you know, Raytheon is now manufacturing nuclear weapons, and they also manufacture bombs and missiles that are used to kill people in Gaza. And they're just doing, I mean, they're making a lot of money, but they're doing terrible things. And so we did not stop, and we continued on. And finally, the security people came, and they tried to convince us to leave. And it was strange, though, because they didn't take our sign away. And while they were talking to us, while the security people were telling us, you know, why don't you go back? We don't want to arrest you. You can hold your sign outside. And we said, no, we want to be here. And while he was talking to us, there were employees going in and out of Raytheon, and the police had their backs. They were talking to us. They couldn't see that the employees were going like this and like this, and they were giving us support. And, you know, we couldn't believe it. We really couldn't believe it. But, you know, when I was an employee of the CIA, I actually was also very curious about the protest groups that used to come. And I wanted to see them. I wanted to see what they were protesting about. But I have to tell you that they didn't let us. Every time the CIA knew that a protest was coming, they would block off the entrance and the employees couldn't get in that way. They didn't want us to see the groups, because now I know as an activist that when employees see people protesting, I think it makes them feel like, yes, when I leave here, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be part of the peace group. And I'm also a member of the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action up in Washington State. We protest the nuclear submarines that are stationed right up there. There are 8 Trident nuclear submarines right there where our protest house is. And, you know, we will be a target in World War III because it's a big base. And I also want to salute all the people, I know some of them, who protest at Büchel. And I have a friend named Susan Crane who spent 7.5 months in a German prison for protesting at Büchel. So I hope that this kind of activism spreads. We're not expecting any results anytime soon, but I believe that it's important to stand up and resist. And Ray and I are lucky because we're retired, so we have a little bit less to lose. We're not going to lose our jobs if we do this kind of protest work. But for me, that means that I have an obligation. It's my duty to do this. And so with that, I want to leave you just with one thought. A friend of mine in the United States, his name is Ed Curtin. He wrote a book recently. He's also a kind of a peace activist and an author. And he says, and I just want to say this to you when you feel discouraged or you feel that the work you're doing is not going anywhere. He says that those who are never lost are forever lost. And to me, that means that if you feel lost right now or you feel sad and depressed about things that are going on in the world, it's because you have a conscience and you're human, and you should allow yourself to feel this pain and this frustration. Because there's so many people that are going on holiday or buying things and they don't think about these things at all. So I want to give my deepest respect to each and every one of you who does what you can from your individual situation. We all have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And before I turn it over to Ray, I already have an answer to the topic of tonight, because the topic of tonight is, wie können wir Frieden bekommen? Sind wir selbst die Hindernisse? And I have already one answer. Thank you for that. Ray, I pass it on to you. Your turn.
I prefer to stand so that I can make a quick getaway when people start throwing things at me. Warum ist es am Rhein so schön? Well, I'm so glad to be back where I can almost see the Rhein, and I know it's in the Nähe. I want to pick up on one thing that Elizabeth did mention about our tour in 2015. And that was that we were traveling from city to city, and our next stop was Rostock, way in the north. And it was very interesting because when we stopped and started to get off, the place there by the train, the platform was full of open suitcases and people milling around, people that didn't look quite like us. And it took us a little while to realize these were Syrian refugees. And there were smiles on these Syrian refugees' faces. And one of the reasons was there was a great big sign right behind a Brötchen and cafe and so forth, a little place, and it said, "Alle sind herzlich willkommen." Okay. Wow. And they were feeling welcome. This was when Angela Merkel decided to take care of the widow, the orphan, the refugee. Now, the cream was on the top of this cake because my friend Elizabeth immediately went down and mingled with the crowd, and you could see that they were erstaunt that someone could speak to them in their native language. Not only Kaffee, not only Brötchen, not only Semmel, but someone speaking in their native tongue. It was just so dear to me that I wanted to recall that to you now. Languages do make a difference. The other thing I would just mention is that I found myself with a black undershirt, really, a T-shirt today, and I was on TV with Judge Napolitano, and I thought, well, what does it say there? Whoops, and then I realized that it says in Arabic, Wir schweigen nicht. Whoa. This shirt is 22 years old. I tend to wear my T-shirts for a long time, okay? It's been washed several times. But this is in Arabic, and I checked with Elizabeth just an hour ago, and she said, yes, that's what it says. And then, of course, in English it says, we will not be silent, okay? As I look out here at this crowd, I see that resonates with you. We're not being silent. Wir schweigen nicht. Sophie Scholl, you all know about her. During my first tour in Munich, I lived in Perlacher Forst, right next to the Stadelheimer, the Gefängnis, where Sophie was guillotined. We need to have the courage of people like Sophie and her brother. So this is just sort of a grand tour of some of the Russian cities, not Russian, German cities that come to mind. I wanted to make sure that you all knew, as I reported to the Judge Napolitano 2 weeks ago, that Germany has exceeded the United States of America in one key dimension, just in case you didn't know that. From this time that I studied Russian, actually it was 1917, that was a little bit before my time, but from 1917 until just this year, the Glavny Vrag, who knows what that means in German or English? Glavny Vrag, the main enemy, right? It was always the Russians. And for the Russians, it was always a Glavny Vrag, the Amerikaner, right? Okay, well, guess what? America has lost this place at the top of the list. Very, very credible polling in Russia recently has revealed that another country has taken America's place as the main enemy. Guess what country that might be? Anybody? Shout it out. Germany. Germany, right. So I told the judge I would be really interested to ask Germans whether they feel very proud of that. And I talked to Peter, and he said, no, I don't feel very proud of that. Are they aware of it? No. Why? Because your media is worse than ours. And that's saying something, fellows, that, meine Damen und Herren, that is really saying something. What little things might I mention about wie werden Kriege gemacht and what's going on in Ukraine? I understand that you're very well educated and you keep talking to each other, which is terrific. So I'm just going to add a couple of details that not many people know. You probably do, but you could tell your friends. What first? Well, before Ukraine, let me start here. There was a German-French consortium, Krauss-Maffei, going back decades, and what were they commissioned to build? The Common European Battle Tank. Oh, they're going to build the best tank. What happened? Oh, there was no Glavny Vrag for Western Europe. Putin didn't seem to be threatening anyone just then, and so they were dead in the water. There was no real need to be seen for building a European common battle tank. So what happened? Oh, then there was this little overthrow of the government in Kiev, And then how did the Russians react? They didn't like it, you know. They didn't like the fact that NATO kept expanding to the east, which they promised not to. And they especially didn't like the prospect of Crimea, their main and their only ice-free all-year-round naval base, would become part of NATO, for God's sake, okay? So the Russians reacted. Now, was that good for Klaus Maffei? Excellent, excellent. The next thing you know, somebody shut down shut down MH17, a Malaysian plane, killing almost 250 people about. Who'd they blame that on? Russians. What did John Kerry say at the time? We have trajectory information. We know exactly when that plane was shot down and where it was shot from and blah, 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 blah. Did he ever show that information? The short answer is no, okay? And I suspect that he didn't show it because it's among that non-existent information that was earlier used to justify, in quotes, the war against Iraq. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that the Ukraine thing was a real boost for not only Klaus Maffei, but for Rheinmetall, who immediately claimed rights to building the common European battle tank, Leopard, okay? And they said, no, that's ours. So there was a court battle. You probably know this better than I do. I just was reading up on this. There's a big court battle. Who has the rights to build a common European battle tank? And it was a draw. They settled it out of court. You build the bottom part, Klaus Maffei. We'll build the top part, Rheinmetall. And I'm going to make lots of them because the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming, and the Russians are coming. Oh, right. There was no indication the Russians were coming before the coup in Kiev. And, you know, if you want to believe that the Russians are coming, then that suggests that you want to believe what President Biden said about this. Now, just to refresh your memory, and I know you know all this, but maybe for people watching later, you know, President Biden warned seriously and often, you think the Russians are going to stop in Ukraine? You think so? They're going on to Poland, the Baltic states. Huh? Now, I've been to Poland. I've been to the Baltic states. I don't know why the Russians want to go in there. Now, no insult to these countries, but was there any scintilla of evidence that Russia, I'm not talking about the Soviet Union now, for God's sake. The Soviet Union imploded, as you know. But everybody knows. Maybe Biden didn't know. So, do you think they're going to stop in Ukraine? Oh, no, they're going to Poland and the Baltic. Well, guess what, folks? And this is the teaching point here. I used to be a professor. The Russians did stop. It's on the record. What record? The negotiators that Zelensky appointed the day after the Russians went into Ukraine to deal with the Russians and come to some sort of agreement. 6 weeks later in Istanbul, there was such an agreement initialed by this, what was his name? I'll think of it in a second. This Ukrainian negotiator who heads up Zelensky's faction in the parliament. Will come to me in a second. Anyhow, he testified and he told all the Ukrainian newspapers, we had this thing all settled, and the U.S. sent Boris Johnson to say, look, you better not sign that. These Russians, they're a threat. And besides, if you go with us and help us weaken the Russians, we're with you for as long as it takes. Guess what, folks? I don't know, be happy or sad. It's kind of embarrassing. It's now is when, as long as it takes, okay? We have stopped the military aid to the Ukrainians. And we should be ashamed of getting involved at all because President Obama, and this is something not many people will remember, in 2015, now if my arithmetic is fit, that's 10 years ago, President Obama said, look, the worst thing we can do for the Ukrainians is to give them the idea that they could prevail over a much stronger Russia. So let's be careful what kinds of commitments we get into. For Russia, Ukraine is an existential issue. For us, no way is Ukraine an existential issue. So please, no military aid to Ukraine. Now, there was a Deputy Secretary of State at the same time under Obama who filled out that message and said, yes, indeed, Mr. President, you know, for every weapon that we gave to Ukraine, they could double it, those Russians. They could triple it, and then they'd quadruple it. So you're absolutely right, Mr. President. Does anyone know the name of that Deputy Secretary of State? Who? No, it was Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken, later Secretary of State, okay? So he changed his colors when Biden said we're exceptional, we're indispensable, we can do what we want, and we give the Russians a bloody nose, and it doesn't matter how many Ukrainians get killed in the process. Tony Blinken said, well, let's do it, let's do it. So that's kind of leadership we have had on that issue. Now, that's important. The two things. There were, Obama had a modicum of common sense and decency. The worst thing we can do for the Ukrainians is to give them the idea that they can prevail over a much stronger Russia. I mean, it was a no-brainer. I mean, a person with a military education like mine, when I was a second lieutenant in the Army and Infantry, I knew that, well, it should have been obvious to all of them, but it wasn't. Or maybe it was, and they did it anyway. So that's the first thing. Now, what about that they already stopped? Well, I talked about that. They stopped with the Istanbul Accords, and then they stopped after the Minsk Accords, and Angela Merkel and Hollande from France both admitted, Minsk, that was just, we just signed up to give the Ukrainians a little bit more time to build up their army. I mean, come on. And look at it now. It was very weak 10 years ago. My God. And Putin himself has admitted, you know, I was naive. Yeah, I thought with that when Angela Merkel and Hollande from France, yeah, I thought these people in Steinmeier, who was there in Kiev during the revolt, and was part of the betrayal of Yanukovych. Yeah, you'll postpone elections and everything will be fine, and overnight there's the coup. So there's a lot to unpack here, but the basic thing is, you know, very few Americans and very few Germans, I dare say, know the real facts here. So the fact is that Putin did stop, okay? Putin doesn't want to take all of Ukraine. My God, why would he want to do that? He's too bright to get into a Vietnam, for God's sake. He wants to do a deal. And what's really surprising to many of my colleagues is that every time he has a chance to go back on his wish to improve relations with the United States, like when the United States gets involved in a war of aggression against Iran, and everybody says, okay, well, that'll be it for Putin. No. The next day, he gets up and says, look, this is a different dimension, okay? We're concerned about Iran. We're concerned about Ukraine. But we give superseding value to improving relations with the United States. Don't ask me to explain that in any detail. I can give you some guesses. But that's the reality, folks. That's the good news. And also the good news is that they talk with each other. And this is such a far cry from the Biden administration, where they didn't talk to the Russians at all, as though they were kind of Untermenschen. It's a big difference. So I talked about the Glavny Vrag, and I talked about Rheinmetall, and not stopping. What was it? Which there? Oh yeah, one other thing. This fellow Stoltenberg from Norway. Now, I read everything that Putin writes or says, or, that was my job. We were both media analysts. In my day, that's all you had. We didn't have any spies in the Kremlin, for God's sake. It was really lucrative to be able to analyze what was missing or what was there in the media. So we've been trying to educate people that when the first President Bush promised not to move NATO 1 inch to the east, well, that mattered because you saw what happened after that. And then people say, yeah, but Ukraine, Putin, it was a war of aggression against it. It was unprovoked. That's a lie, folks, and I can prove it. It was, what else? Oh, full scale, full scale. That's the rubric. Full scale with 90,000 troops to scare the hell out of the Ukrainians so there could be a Minsk Accord. That's not full scale, folks. Ask your editors what full scale really means. And then illegal. Now, I've talked to some international lawyers, some of them who literally wrote the book. It's unsettled law. What Putin explained as to why he felt he had to go into Ukraine, look it up. I think it's 51, Article 51 of the UN Charter. It's unsettled law. In other words, it's illegal. Well, I'll leave that to the lawyers. I'm not going to say it's illegal. I'm just going to say it's unsettled law. So it was not unprovoked. Okay, it was not full scale. And I don't know if it was illegal or not. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not. I'm sort of happy I'm not a lawyer. Okay, now let me just finish with this. In my study of German history, I've come across a couple of things that you may not know. Now, this crowd probably does. But I know a lot about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. As a matter of fact, when I was in the plane, the only good thing that happened on that Icelandic flight was they had a film about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Do you know about that film? It's just out last year. It's very, very good. It talks not only about his speaking out for the German church. The German church still not speaking out? Anyhow, it's a really good film. So when they wrapped Bonhoeffer up, they took him to a prison where, as you could see in the film, they shot people. And so they shot him as the Allies approached just 2 weeks before the meeting on the Elbe, when German and Soviet forces had that wonderful meeting. Now, there was a geolog at the University of Berlin at the same time, actually throughout the 40s. He actually gave some advice to some of the Hesse and some of the other German leaders. But then he saw his Jewish friends being taken off. And he could no longer abide by what was happening, and so he changed. People can change. And he started a little group around him. He was very popular. He had tenure at the university. Some of you know what that means. Okay. So he used that tenure, and he used his privileged position to speak out against Hitler. Well, again, the month before the end of the war, they wrapped Albrecht Haushofer up. Okay. And they brought him to a different prison. It was a prison where they shot you. They didn't hang you, okay? And so they said, now, can I be heard? Yeah. Okay. Dr. Haushofer, before we shoot you, you must make a confession. He said, warum? You must. It's in the orders here. We have the orders, you have to make a confession, a written confession. Now, Haushofer said, in American slang, that's for the birds, you know. Give me a break. I'm not going to make any confession. So as the Allies approached, they shot him. And out of his pocket, as they picked him off the floor, was a little zettel. He had written a confession. It was in the form of a sonnet. I've shortened it a little bit. It's very brief. I'll read it to you, and then I don't have to translate it, okay? Schuld was the name of this sonnet. Doch bin ich schuldig, aber anders als ihr denkt. Ich musste früher meine Pflicht erkennen. Ich musste schärfer Unheil nennen. Mein Urteil habe ich zu lang gelenkt. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about there is such a thing as too late. Zu spät. Zu spät. We'll come up on that time now, folks. And I have a manufactured principle that I like to espouse because it has to do with was zu tun now. And that's a big question, it seems to me. Here it is in German. Es heißt das Noah-Prinzip. Unser Lob gilt nicht dem, die den Regen vorhersagt, sondern den, der die Arche baut. Auf Englisch, no more applause, no more praise for predicting rain, praise only for building arks. That's our challenge here. Each of us has a couple of planks of wood, so to speak, to put together an ark or two, and there is such a thing as too late. So this time, let's sing Die Gedanken sind frei as though we believe that's still to be the case. Die Gedanken sind frei. Alle bitte. Die Gedanken sind frei. Wer soll beraten? Die fliegen vorbei. Wie nächtlichen Schatten. Kein Mensch wird sie wissen. Kein Jäger erschießt mit Pulver und Blei. Die Gedanken sind frei. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You have done a great job.